For body as subject or agent of human activity has intensified in the last 3 decades. It's been a violence towards thought and social practice. Why heroin now?
Could you repeat that, please? I'm sorry.
Is it too clipped for you?
It's just too fast.
Okay. The search for body as subject or agent of human activity has intensified in the last 3 decades. The sort of violence in thought and social practice. Why heroin now?
Oh, well. It's funny that the end of the question, strikes me as like, why heroin now? It's like, it's almost as if you're asking why, why is heroin becoming popular or something like that, The body is subject, is that what you were saying?
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, in heroin, in a heroin addiction, I think that you definitely have a kind of, I don't know, I guess it can be examined as a relationship, really, like it's a relationship to yourself. And you, my experience, anyway, is that for all of my frustration and unfulfilled desire that I had experienced as something, directed outside of myself, that I was able to take that whole landscape of frustration and suffering, pain. Really, it's painful. The sense of unfulfillment and feeling. Well, in any case, what I'm trying to say is that you draw of the body. I think of it as like you bring it all, and it comes to you. It's all right here. It's right there, and you are always able to engage in an extremely absolute certain, like in a very dependable, that's why they call it dependency, but it's very dependable. It's like you're playing this song over and over again to yourself. It's a kind of like blues, It's like almost like the resolution of the blues. You're always singing to yourself. Yeah, baby. Oh, thank you. You know exactly what I need. You know exactly what I want, and you're always giving it to yourself. So you give yourself that bottom, so that everything else is has a relative importance in terms of desire, in terms of what you want and what you think you need, and so whatever it is, subliminal or drive that may be the the metabolic technology of endeavor, outside of yourself. You take care of that. That's taken care of over and over again. So that you get the impression that when you're looking out of yourself, that everything outside of your body is not involved with that crisis. That crisis is taken care of. The problem, of course, is that the effect is that it creates a tremendous, an abysmal gulf between you and everything that's outside of yourself. So basically, in terms of the body and the aesthetic of the body, or the appearance of the body, or the philosophical or semiotic, analysis, of the body, it isolates you. It confirms. It's an odd contradiction. It's in the sense that it confirms your greatest fear. You can be alone, but it's okay. You're okay with that. You're on your own. You're by yourself. You're taking care of it. You don't need any kind of any other kind of address on that level. Of course, I was one of those people who was a quote-unquote functioning addict. I mean, I appeared to be engaged in all the things that I, had been interested in and was building in my own personal history, my engagement, the diversity of my interests, and where I had invested myself outside of myself, and where I looked for a reciprocity of action, that I went through all those motions still. But at that point, that becomes, at a certain point in one's addiction, I think that becomes a function of denial, that you go through it. I mean, what else can you do? I mean, and then later on, further along, I realized that at the bottom of it, I didn't care about anything but getting the drug and getting it steady and getting it good and and having it, and that was so alarming to me, that in and of itself. It's scary. It's a really scary reality, and it's so personal. You can't explain it to anybody else, because, like I said, it's that personal. It's your driving force, whatever it is, whether it's, I don't know what you want to call it, I mean, you could look at it from different disciplines and angles, it's the id, it's the it's sexual, it's fundamental. And that's the real first insidious thing about heroin addiction, is that it functions on a subliminal, really fundamental, level of desire. How it accomplishes that, or how that comes about, is hard to say. I mean, I suppose it's a combination of things. I think it's the nature of the, brain chemistry, and people also talk about, having a cellular addiction, and I had heard that term, and it was more or less more of like an aesthetic concept to me, up to a certain point. But then when I went through my first real hard kicking withdrawal, when I went through my first real heavy, like dark night of the soul kind of withdrawal symptoms, which takes a while to get to, but when I started going through that, I understood what that meant, because it's not just in your head, it's not just a localized pain, or it's not like like an itch you can't scratch. It's like it comes at you from every place. It seems to be coming from a cellular level, in that way. And it's astonishing what it puts you through. But I may be digressing. I don't know. I'm not sure if I'm answering your question.
But actually, once.
I mean, when we talk about the body as like subject, as an aesthetic, or the subject of the arts, or as though the arts, or this investigation, or this cultural as if a frame is coming in close on the body as a subject of investigation. I don't know that I don't know if it may be true, that it may be true that it's become the subject of a kind of artistic or aesthetic or philosophical investigation. But in terms of human experience, like truly culturally, I think that the story is quite the opposite. I think that we're alienated from our bodies. I think that we feel, well, just that, separated from them. And I think that my experience is that of searching for a meaningful or effective way to be present, to occur, to appear in the culture, in my life, to other people, to have, to feel free to act as a subject, and I think that escapes us more and more in this culture, and I think that it's an extremely frustrating and yes, painful reality. I think that it takes the form of a kind of anguish. I don't think that I'm alone in feeling that kind of anguish as a kind of contemporary, condition that we all share. Getting back to heroin, I think that to answer the question why it's becoming more and more popular. Wow. I think that there's a threshold in which you can only feel ineffective, unpresent, impossibly outside of the scenario for so long in your life, and you reach a kind of threshold where that position is so painful that you're either going to make some kind of courageous leap through that barrier and face the possible punishing risks of doing that, or you're going to retreat. And I think that heroin is, in that respect, a kind of retreat into an anonymity that's extremely personal. You don't really have to answer to that question of appearing in the scene. That's what obscenity is. Obscene is out of the scene. When the scene, speaking in theatrical terms, when the scene is empty of meaningful content, what do we mean? What is meaningful content in a scene? It's one can examine it from different perspectives. One can say that when a scene doesn't correspond to a kind of subtext, kind of mythological correspondence, or analogous, universal, appearance and archetypal presence, representational of a more universal idea, blah blah blah. But the more fundamental truth of the scene not occurring is when the humanity is absent. We hold all of those things through the ages in such high regard, mythology, archetypical, and even the recognition and appreciation of meaning itself as an aspect of consciousness, which is so triumphantly human. We hold all of that as in such high regard. And are missing somehow, or slipping slowly in our culture and in our society into a state where human presence itself is denigrated, is disregarded, is not counted as anything. If human presence doesn't represent or doesn't function or doesn't operate on some other agenda, serving some other agenda, then it doesn't have any value, it seems, more and more. So it seems to me that, and in the theater, in my own work, I feel that I'm acutely aware of that, that focus. It's. I would prefer to embrace it as a mystery than to have to explain it in order to justify it, But I know it. I know it is. I know it exists, and probably the most recognizable evidence of or the most the least labored evidence of what it is I'm talking about, something that we can recognize together, is in love. There's something inexplicable about what that occurrence of recognition is in love. It's not only a contract which is unconditional. It transcends. Love is sublime, and it's sublime, in my opinion, in my experience, precisely because it. Because it's such a direct experience of this other mystery of human recognition and human presence that seems to have less and less value in our society. The more you can objectify something, the more you can violate it, the more you can use it, the more you can dismiss it, the more you can ignore it, the more you can violate it. It comes down to violence and again, this concept of obscenity. The argument against pornography, for example, which is a problematic discourse. And the thing that's thrust in the middle of it, the question of human, constitutional rights, is a red herring. The reality is it's like abortion also. It's like people's own personal sensibility and their own personal feeling. How do you take an ethical and moral position that comes directly from your daily experience of human intercourse with people? It's less and less possible because we have less and less of an experience of direct human intercourse. It's always filtered through or contingent upon or in service of blah blah blah. Whether it's the state or whether it's money or whether it's whatever. So it's my view is that if heroin is a painkiller, and it is, like taking an aspirin, so to speak. You have a headache, you want to stop the pain, you take an aspirin. And I think that it presents itself as an ontological, an aspirin for ontological hysteria, and it seems to work momentarily. But it also takes you out of the game. It also removes you from the scene. Confirms the thing that you want to resolve, that you really should be going towards and going through. And that's why I think a lot of junkies, a lot of people who have been junkies, are really sensitive people. You talk to junkies, you talk to them a little bit, you find out that they're, underneath it, they just couldn't take it. They just couldn't take it. I'm not giving anybody an excuse. I'm not excusing anybody, for taking it, taking that time out. But that's what it is. It's taking time out, and the problems start to occur when you're so far out of it that you can't function at all. You can't create that other character, that's demanded of you to function in the world, to become a character. So this thing about subject, the body as subject in relationship to the creation of character, who to be, how to take action. You know, in the study of biomechanics, Meyer holds a beautiful, seminal, examination of the body from his historical moment, the constructivist social context. You know, one can extrapolate some fundamental ideas that are perhaps pertinent here, like that there are two forces that commingle in human behavior, very generally speaking. I mean, biological and societal. It's also perhaps rings that kind of concept rings true in other disciplines, perhaps in psychology or some other way of looking at it. But in the theater and in the investigation of biomechanics and the creation of character and the situating of the body, which in the theater it is all the forms you really need, is this body as subject, you know. That, you know, in examining that, I think that we find ourselves in our historic moment in a tremendous crisis of the biological fact of the presence of the body in conflict with its environment. And one wants to resolve that somehow. One feels, I think it's a really fundamental urge, you know, people need to resolve that somehow. You must, to survive. You know, you have to become, even provisionally from one moment to another, a character who can perform to make the money to pay the rent, if nothing else. You know, if our politics are reduced to bread, you know, then you know, I think that that's to me it's revealing that that one can bring oneself to that interface, or that threshold between the self and others, or the subject and the context, and, you know, as the body, as the self, most effectively and most satisfyingly in a context which is as urgent as hunger, which is as, because that's what we know, that's what we are, you know. And well, in Artaud's introduction to the theater and its double, he makes that point very clear. He draws an analogy between hunger and culture, you know. And you know, in a class society, people will look with disdain upon people whose politics are reduced to bread, when the fact of the matter is that the real decadence and corruption of the political, you know, tendency, you know, the polis, of maintaining the city so that it functions, the political environment, the social environment, so that for the continuation of the species. I mean, this is fundamental stuff. This is hunger. This is eating. Apparently, people who are in a position to make decisions about other people, you know, they lose sight of the fact that politics is always confined to bread. That the question of human action and human behavior is always about that. There is no other question somehow in terms of what puts all of that into action. What we look for when we look into each other's eyes. What we're looking for. You know, what affirmation we're looking for. That's what love is. It's not a question of being concerned about those things or not being concerned about those things. I think that that's what we are. And in that respect, you know, coming back to heroin and desire and all of that, we live in a you know, we've inherited a culture which wants to separate and compartmentalize everything, you know, in a way. Foucault's concept of when he says the fantasia of the library, there's all that information. You know, the subject is not the you know, the operating of one machine or another, or one structure or another, or working in one area or another, but the subject is the one, you know, and the one has to be acting from some ground that is the all, that is the unity. I mean, excuse me for like waxing in some, you know, perhaps you know, pop spiritualism kind of way, but spiritual, mystical, or whatever or not, in my opinion, I think that that's what moves us. That's what moves us forward. We want to know that. We want to know that. I want to know that when I go to my job in the morning, you know, and I'm going to sit at a typewriter, for example, and do some temp work in an office or something. I want to have a sense of my action and what I'm doing and what I'm living in that moment, what I'm performing, as addressing a relationship of the whole. You know, I mean, I want to feel that. I want to know what that is. Gee, I feel that the discourse, or the you know, that what I'm tracing here is getting more and more sort of like space in it. You know, but that's okay. I feel like you know, these days I feel less and less desire to put the thing, keep putting the thing together, you know. I feel more and more a tendency of more of like a surrender and trying to recapture again and again that sensibility which is there. I think that I don't think that we need to change everything to act from that position. I think that we just have to remember it. I think that we can look to each other for that. I think that we have all the evidence of it, and that what follows from that is changing the world so that it's possible to, you know, to continue to carry this potential forward, you know, because we're in trouble, you know. But I've kind of given up my despair somehow, and I feel like onset and then lapse, and that's okay, because the onset comes again.
I'll just leave it as a statement. Yeah?
I'm just ready to go.
So this is long-winded.
It's not long-winded. It's complex, and I'm trying to, when I hear the whole question, as you've constructed it, it just brings up a whole series of related problems. The first thing that you mentioned.
Wait, I'm not running yet. Oh, it is running.
The first thing that you mentioned about consciousness. Would you say that first line again? Because I find that interesting.
Yeah, consciousness has itself become an object of domination in the modern period.
Right, yeah, just that alone. I think that, and then later when you bring up, Foucault and his examination of the development of the social political anatomy and the project of control, really, it's they want to control behavior so that it's profitable for a few people. But that's let's not get into that. Let's assume that's true. I mean, like the question first of all sets everything squarely in a political question, and so before we, let's not get into an examination of whether we live in a fascist society or not, and let's speak beyond the ABCs of anarchism, let's say. Yeah, let me address it like that. I did a piece in 1981 with the Alchemical Theatre. It was one of the first pieces that we did in the theatre proper after doing a lot of street theatre, consolidating that company. We went into the theatre proper and did a piece called The Daily Activity of Slaves, which was based on Freddie Perlman's short book, or actually it's kind of like a long essay, called The Reproduction of Daily Life. In that piece, or what we were examining in that piece, Perlman's development of a concept which Marx articulated, although Perlman's an anarchist, as I am. But still, he did a development of this Marxist idea that it's the basic activity of slaves that reproduces slavery. It's the basic activity of the tribe that reproduces the tribe. And that the production process in dialectical materialism and all of that, which Foucault and some of his French contemporaries wanted to break through this post-Marxist concept of examining society beyond production, and this concept of process, and even questioning this idea of the common good in terms of process and all of that. To look at the idea that one of the fundamental things about humanness, or being a human being, and that rather than being confined to responding to our environment on the basis of instinct, and that if the environment changes too radically, we just can't deal with it. One of the significant things about human beings is that they adapt. They adapt. What was it, Malatesta, who said people adapt and habituate themselves to the environments in which they live. It's the beginning of one of his essays. And this is a double-edged sword for us. It means that it's probably the operating aspect of humanity that's made it possible for us to survive through all of these millennia, in an evolutionary sense and all of that. But the downside of it is that it leaves us vulnerable to systems of control and man-made, sick, quote unquote, environments which we have to deal with, which we've inherited. I myself, I feel like I'm the inheritor of this mess, as you are sitting there, as long as I'm alive and you're alive, that's our situation, And, one of the problems with this, let's look at the bright side. The bright side is that we can change the environment, and that changing the environment has as much to do with changing ourselves as examination of the self and the trip internally and and some kind of correspondence with some cosmic idea. The most immediate thing is that the more we change the environment that we live in, there's a technology of the self, as the Greeks would have it. There's a technology of the self in which we can construct, we can build a scaffold of a kind of environment around us that we have to interact with, and that determines to a large extent what we will do, what we can do, the tremendous sensibility that we have in terms of human potential and what we are and what we can become, and our ability to change and adapt is very much hinges on the technology of creating outside of ourselves an environment that we have to cope with, that we have to deal with. And that sense of technology, that's a fact, and that we've inherited a socio-political environment that's in motion around us. Which has certain objectives to it. Gives us the impression that there's some plan involved with it. That there's the conspiracy buffs will immediately imagine, well, there's some people who are controlling all of this, and I think that that's true and not true. I think that we have to deal with the fact of who we are, that we ourselves have adapted to this, and that's a dilemma for us. Let me jump to a related subject, which I think is more directly in response to the first part of your question. Something that I feel that I know more about. Which is that in the theater, my examination and working with and developing the discipline of biomechanics on the stage and in performance has led me and the people that I worked with to a situation where we were examining the body and the human presence in relationship to an environment which is acting upon it, and examining a kind of active relationship between those two things: the inner world, the inner life, the inner experience, the experience of the self, and the environment around, which determines to a large extent what you do, how you do it, why you do it. Bringing the camera in to a detail of that larger picture and looking at technology and the great acceleration of technology and Foucault's examination of how that technology is coupled with power and politics of power and those kinds of constructs, the relationship between technology and power. That first of all, in the earlier part of the century, we found ourselves in a technology more and more, kind of an onset of technology which imposed itself more and more on the body, which was more and more insistent in the environment. There was less and less escape from just the fact of the technology around Now, that's not always a bad thing. It wasn't, every aspect of it isn't negative or hurtful or violent or. But one of the interesting facts about it is that the technology becomes a kind of prosthesis on the body, or is taken up as a prosthesis. The minute you pick up a hammer, it becomes an extension of your hand and your arm, and you pass the force and the velocity of a Taylorism kind of experiment, with the efficiency of the interplay or the interface of the human human metabolic machine with the machine of technology that we create objectively around us. And I think that we learned more and more that there are consequences to that coupling of industrial technology, let's call it, in the earlier part of the century, and the human body, and it has like political consequences and sociological consequences, and yeah. I think that now the technology has developed to a point where it becomes a prosthesis, if you will, much more directly on consciousness. Before we know what consciousness is, or before we have a technology of consciousness, we have a technology that attaches itself to consciousness. And that's that seems to up the stakes somehow in terms of power, repression, technology, the soft machine of humanity, and the coupling of all of that together. It seems as if technology is coming towards us, and it's almost like an invasion into the deeper recesses of what the human experience is, and becomes, as we've understood already, a determining factor in shaping what humanity is, what its goals are, what we, collectively and individually. I think that it's important to understand that we're not just the helpless, victims of technology, and that I believe that there's a correspondent, there's I think that it challenges us to meet No. I think that there's less and less ground to examine this question that's human. I think that it's hard to look at it and I think that there's a lot of reactionary ideas around about it, about technology. There's a kind of like Luddite tendency to want to just like throw it all off, to escape it, to You know, especially, I think that like an alarm has gone out, you know, with this, you know, this change into like micro-technology and genetic engineering and all this kind of stuff, you know, like I think it scares people, you know. I think that as soon as you start looking into it, you start feeling, you know, it's like that weird sinking nausea, you know, that feeling like, I don't really understand this, you know. You start to feel like, whoa, this shit is taking over. You know? But I don't believe that that's really true. I think that I think that we need a platform again, a ground. I think the important thing is not examining whether technology is a good thing or a bad thing, or whether the coupling with technology between you know, human metabolism versus technological speed, you know, and all that kind of stuff is fatal for humanity or something like that. I think that that's misplaced. I think that the only way to articulate meaningful questions about technology is from a ground and from a platform that we've begun to abandon, that we need to get back to. This is how I feel about it. It's like, you know, I think that we need to have a measure that we can take of it. That isn't only in terms of technology, that isn't only in terms of progress, or in terms of, you know, we have a tendency to look at human, you know, at history and the future of history, or the continuation of the human species as being guaranteed and moved along by these great technological leaps. And while technology, I think, will always be with us, but, you know, I mean, it's there, you know, it's here, it's part of us. I think that there's a door of escape from that machinery that Foucault describes as closing in on us, as confining us, you know, to being a certain thing, you know, of disciplining us to serving the technology, or to serving the power structure, or to serving, you know, to serving. The only, you know, the perhaps it's not the only path, but to my mind, where we find a window of opportunity to escape that and to take with us what's meaningful, or even to measure what's meaningful and useful with any of that, begins someplace else. It begins in a creative discovery of what it is we really want, you know. And I think that that's missing in our culture. You know, of course we don't want to be repressed. Of course nobody wants to be controlled. I don't want to be a servant. Nobody does. You know. But the velocity and the development of technology and power and the coupling of all of that has subjugated us so rapidly. You know, and so, you know, seemingly, you know, the closure seems so, you know, impenetrable, you know, and complex. You know, it's almost as if we're in this labyrinth. There's no way out of it. But I don't believe that that's really true. And I don't think that anyone else really believes that that's true. You know, I think that the subversive moment comes again. I'll say it again in the project of human recognition that takes all of that into account. That it's a spark. it's that part of us which is not touched by any of that, you know. And there's no ground for that hardly anymore, you know. There used to be, if we can, you know, our understanding of history was led up to this time that we're in now. You know, it's one can almost look back nostalgically at that, you know. In fact, we even make kind of like Disneylands of the historical, you know, idea of a time when, you know, either when things were simpler, or when things were more direct, or when things were more human, or you know, I mean, we even do it with like this decadism thing, you know, the 50s, the 60s, a time of innocence, you know. It wasn't a time of innocence, you know. It was, what was it? I mean, that we. It's no different than it is now. It's just having the courage to look to one another and to create a technology of desire. You know, I mean, if there's a technology to be furthered and created, you know. And I think that that answer comes from. I think it comes from the arts. I think it's one of the things that's left to us to access, to use, as a tool, as an affirmation of at least some evidence to carry that potential forward. And all the arts, you know, even as we re-examine, you know, I mean, you know, it's funny as much as the circle is closing on this idea of technology and total control, and you know, oh my God, you know, we're entering the age of total control, you know. At the same time, in my reading of things and what I look for, I find evidence that I'm not alone in you know, being a person who is looking for every possible crack in that system of total control and discrediting, you know, the you know, I mean, look at the world of philosophy and linguistics, you know. I mean, in very long-winded, convoluted terms, they're discrediting the authority of textualities. You know what that, I mean, you know, the implications of that is like, you know, it's like the Torah, you know, I mean, like the law, you know, the Bible, in the beginning was the Word, you know. They're starting to write, you know, they're trying to turn the whole machine of that repression and power in on itself so it just collapses, you know. Dangerous, exhilarating, yeah, you know. I don't think it's so dangerous because I have complete faith in the fact that we'll still stand. This all can collapse and we're still there. You're there, I'm here, you know. It's what we need is one another, you know. And all this other stuff is in the way. The stuff that doesn't serve us as you know, as what? What are we? I don't know. But I know that we're not here to be servants to one another. But I think that we need a ground where we can examine these ideas. And for me, that's the theater. That's how I see the theater. That's why I continue to work in the theater. There's no other reason for me, you know. To me, it's examining the direct experience of the relationship of the one to the collective, you know, the one and the many, you know. It's a mystical experience. It is, and it's concrete, and it has a technology of invocation. It has a technology of a kind of closure which is transgressed in both directions between the world and the art itself of the closure of the theater. I mean, it's marvelous. I'm in love with the theater. And because I believe that the theater reflects the ways in which we're really in love with one another, why we even bother, why we're even alarmed at any of these things, and why we care, and why it's, you know what I mean, as we as we slough, off the, all of the historical reasons for caring, I mean, we live more in a more and more secular space, There's a scrambling for a new fundamentalism, and that's all okay. It's all in process, But for me, the theater is one of the only grounds where we have the chance to examine through the revolutionary action of dismantling the power structure that has us held in fear and suffering. I mean, to put it in a nutshell, I believe that. I do. I don't think that the theater, I don't think that political theater is to talk about that. I think that political theater is that action, is to do that. And we've, I think that this century has given a lot of evidence of that desire and that kind of investigation, both within the closure of the theater proper and in a transgression of that space, of going out into the world, of taking, addressing this idea of the society of the spectacle, long before the situationists, sold it to us as an aesthetic to abhor, God bless them. But yeah, I believe that the theater is a ground where we can begin to, where we can speak a language that addresses all of that. That's the language of. For me, it's a revolutionary language. It's, and it's where it begins. Let's stop there.
The living theater investigated the suppression of desire as an explicit index of culture. For example, the suppression of desire secured. The suppression of desire is secured in the focus of social control. Desire is in part produced in and through social relations subject to transformation.
Yeah. Yeah, when I joined the Living Theatre, they were at the beginning of a project that lasted for some years. For most of the time that I was with them, we were constructing, assembling pieces and inventing scenes and, creating our theater work out of an analysis that served us very well. I thought it was an interesting approach to a cohesive body of theater pieces that had a unity to them, in the same way that a single piece has unity, whether it's a painting or whether it's a play. This project, which spanned over years, had a unifying principle to it, which can be expressed probably it can be expressed in a number of ways, but probably there are two ways to express it that explain it most fundamentally. The short explanation is that it was about the social contract, about domination and submission, and it was an examination of the social contract, and we thought that was an interesting focus to develop a meaningful and functional political theater for our time. A more complex image, which explains the ground on which all of this sprang from, is in the form of a kind of matrix that can be expressed in a kind of mandala that has 6 points or 6 directions to it, therefore being a kind of a star, matrix, but a mandala kind of structure. The unity having a closure, a mandala being a world picture, and the relationship of the elements within that world picture being an active technology of ideas and relationships. And in this case, we articulated 6 elements, which were drawn from, in fact, the writings of Sascha Masoch, Leopold von Sascha Masoch, for whom the term masochism was coined from his work, in the same way that sadism comes from the Marquis de Sade. Anyway, the 6 points on this mandala were love, money, property, death, the state, and war. And we designated those 6 as the 6 houses of bondage. I believe that that designation is right out of Masoch's writing. The 6 houses of bondage: money, love, money, war, the state, property, and love, money, war, state, property, and love. Did I repeat one? Anyway, these 6 houses of bondage were love, death, war, property, state, and money. And the way we proceeded was, after this designation of these points on this mandala, this matrix of relationships, we said, okay, we're going to make 36 major works, and then a lot of smaller pieces that we called the 150 plays. The 36 plays, the themes for them were money in the house of money, money in the house of war, money in the house of state, money in the house of love, money in the house of property, etc. Around the mandala, the next would be perhaps property in the house of state, property in the house of war, property in the house of love. So we define 36 fundamental sort of plot-like relationships, thematic relationships for the plays. Before we started working on the 36 plays, we did what we call the pilot piece, called 7 Meditations on Political Sadomasochism. The 7 meditations being, the first 6 being the 6 houses of bondage, and the 7th being a meditation on liberation and revolutionary change. That was a kind of study piece that we did indoors. We played it in universities, we played it in union halls, we played it in theaters sometimes, but we played it in a lot of indoor places. The piece ended and was structured in a way to encourage the ending of the piece being a discussion in and among the audience on the meditations. And the basic form of it was to be a public assembly. It wasn't so much a presentational piece or a representational piece. It was the idea was for the audience and the actors to meditate together on these houses of bondage, and then afterwards to discuss it, so that the theater is turned into a public forum in which very spontaneously different groups formed around the, like after the play, or like when the play proper was finished, and there was, the play was structured so that the whole thing segued into these discussions. We didn't go out into the audience and conduct, lectures, or we didn't facilitate discussions. We sort of created a kind of bridge, a transitional scene in which the result of which was that, the final scene that was played in the play was that if there were 300 people in the place, most of the people stayed and were in like little groups, and there was nobody conducting the discussions. People were really talking. And it was very interesting. We learned, it's astonishing that given the opportunity, or given the time, and this whole idea of meditation, given that ground and given that time, what people have to say about these ideas on an ideological level, from taking a measure between ideology and practice, that's what the discussions were, about repression, about domination and submission, and personal relationships, and love, and in the structure of the state, and the whole concept of money. People really had a lot to say to each other. And we performed that play hundreds of times. And what always astonished me over the years in performing that play is that I've so rarely come upon that kind of discussion. Because there's something extraordinary, something unique to the theater. This is what I was trying to bring out earlier about the theater having this great potential, this great possibility of being the great public assembly. And inventing forms for it to become that are as complex aesthetically as a great quote unquote opera on the stage. The real Gesamtwerke is the one which includes the audience, Mr. Wagner. Thank you very much. But in any case, what's always astonished me over the years is how rarely those opportunities come up spontaneously in the culture. You might be in a pub or in some place of some kind of public gathering. If you think about it, you don't really come up with a lot of spaces that are a closure for free public assembly. There's church. There's, usually it's like, to witness something, or to, but just for the purpose of free discourse, or around certain ideas that isn't, where the line isn't drawn, where the audience just listens to what somebody has to say, and then it just kind of like goes out from there. Of course, people talk. They go see a lecture or even a movie. People talk about the movie afterwards. Did you like it? Yes. No. Oh, I thought blah blah blah. They criticize the form. They criticize the plot, the story, the whatever. And once in a while, I've had experiences where it got very personal. Differences of ideas about what they saw in the movie, or what But it's a rare occurrence that 300 people will stand around in groups of 5 to 10 people and discuss things, sort of like the same kind of area of discussion, and compare notes and walk from group to group and speak passionately. It's like a great relief. What an atmosphere! It's incredible. And it's not forced or contrived, or it follows. There's something natural about it. Really, just right there. So the potential is always right there. It always astonished me how it always happened. There was never a performance where, like, at the end of it, it was like, well, everybody kind of like just shut up and went home. And it wasn't because we created. Well, I had made reference to this idea of the segue into that event, the public event. It didn't take very much. It's not as if we had some, really clever, we didn't have to seduce or fool anybody or anything like that. We just made the gesture of handing it over to them and extending, that's what it is, as one of the elements of it certainly, is extending the dignity of performance to the occasion of free public discourse. Wow, you know, what a simple idea, you know. And the Living Theatre did that, you know. The Living Theatre is criticized from a lot of angles, you know, and in some circles, especially in America, unfortunately, is dismissed, you know, before it's even discussed. But to me, that part of the, you know, that period of the Living Theatre's work is more significant to our present situation than many of its other periods. I mean, well, I don't want to go into the history of the Living Theatre. The Living Theatre was a tremendous work over years, from the 50s to the 80s. You know, it still survives somehow. They still go on. But that period that I was with them, I was really grateful for being in and among that group of people, because boy, that was courageous stuff. You know, we didn't you know, we didn't know what was going to happen. We thought, you know, we didn't know. It could have been, you know, the outcome is often predictable. I mean, often unpredictable. You know, we had some hard moments, especially when we did that on the street. The other pilot piece of Seven Meditations, I mean, of this group of pieces, this mandala of ideas, which, by the way, we call the Legacy of Cain, was the sort of code name for the whole project over the years. We did another pilot piece called Six Public Acts, which had a longer title, which I thought was wonderful. Six Public Acts to Transmute Violence into Concord, Tampering with the Master-Slave Relationship, Prologue to the Legacy of Cain, was the whole title of it. But of course we called it Six Public Acts. And it consisted of a gathering ceremony in some public square. We handed out maps. On the maps, the audience saw within a radius, a walkable radius around the gathering place in their downtown area, a bank, a church, an apartment building, a department store, a prison, you know, a manifestation of each one of the houses of bondage. The house of love, the house of property, of course the house of money was a bank, the house of the state was either some state house, or sometimes it was a prison, someplace where there was an American flag outside. And the form of it was ceremonies and processions. But more truly, the form was ceremonies, processions, and we used to say ceremonies and processions. But it really was ceremonies, processions, and discussions. After each house, we would do a kind of procession and bring the audience to the first house. Like, so say we'd all arrive at a bank, and there would be the bank, and there would be us, the actors, and then there would be the audience around us. And the audience would be looking at the bank, and we were sort of like between them and the bank, and we'd do a piece, maybe a 10-minute play. I won't go into describing exactly what that piece was, but it was like a little vignette about money, in which we made our statement. And we said, you know, our statement as anarchist pacifists was that money usurps our sensibility in terms of value, and we don't know what anything's worth anymore until we get rid of the money system. Let's get rid of it. Is it possible to survive without money? Can you imagine an economy or a social, you know, a social economy that doesn't have a money system? What would it be? Is it possible? You know? And we went out into the audience with that question. And there was a timing. We had 10 minutes. We had 10 minutes. And we would go out and we just directly ask people, what do you think? What do you think of the scene? And we would encourage, you know, we got really good at it. We got good at encouraging people to not just talk to us or to refute or confirm what it is we did, but to get them to talk to one another. And we'd get that going in the audience. And it wasn't trickery. It was just always right there. You know, people really had something to say. And the discussions would start. And then a bell would ring, and you know, that's what the structure of the piece was like. It's now time to go to the house of property, and we'd move to the house of property, and people would have to sort of like swallow what else they had to say about it, or they'd go on walking with the procession and talking to each other very often. Anyway, that went on through the 6 houses, and we brought people around their own town to like these different places. We said what we thought and asked them what they thought, and it was just really simple public assembly kind of stuff, you know. Anyway, sometimes we would incur a real reactionary wrath, you know, people throwing things at us or acting out, really, like, you know, yelling and screaming, and, you know. Once I recall, only once, we did many performances of Six Public Acts in Europe and in the States, but it was in Pittsburgh that there was some people came out of a bar with baseball bats, chased us. You know, it's like that, momentary, and then cooled out, and everything was all right. But you know, again, the astonishing thing, which I'm not so astonished at it anymore, is that our tendency is to believe that, you know, as Freud would have us believe, that if it wasn't for the you know, repressive measures that are taken in society, some uncontrolled, you know, the id agrees it's ugly, you know. I mean, in other words, like, you know, civilization is a necessary filter, or that people need to be controlled. I mean, whether this is Freud's belief or not, that this is I'm speaking more in pop terms. You know, it's like people consider this like a Freudian concept, that humanity is barbaric and needs society, including and especially its repression, in order to sort of be disciplined into the creatures that can function and build a workable society. That without that, we would be in chaos. This is the great danger of chaos. You know, we need police. You know, we need. We need voluntary submission to the law, all of that stuff, you know. And as anarchists in living theater, we were very interested in examining the forms and potentials of public assembly that weren't controlled so squarely, so tightly, you know. Mass demonstrations and all of that, you know, that inspired a lot of our work too, because we were in a way trying to create a response to years of you know, political demonstrations, which more and more were coming to become something like a kind of police theater where everything is arranged. You know, I mean, even civil disobedience has come to that point. You know, so it's not really very disobedient. You know, to have the lawyers and the, you know, waiting, and everybody getting arrested, and that's it. And the, you know, the cops are there, and everybody's yawning in terms of the you know, it's just not good theater. You know, it's just not very exciting. So we're going to go there, we're going to lay down, we're going to get arrested, and that's that. And it's like, it's just going to be entered into the annals of, okay, they came and they did that. And you know, it's not. It doesn't really. It's not really very dangerous. But the point is not to create a dangerous moment, you know, or to fight the cops or anything like that. The point is to be more creative with public assembly. You know, whether it's in a political demonstration or whether it's in our daily lives. I think that cultures which are less repressed and less under the repressive aegis of a Protestant work ethic, such as America is, you know, and Western culture in general, I think that their tendency is just to gather more, to hang out. I mean, you go to third world countries, people are, you know, it's not because they're unemployed and disenfranchised only, it's because it's part of the culture. People go to the public square, they meet each other, they talk to each other. News is spread, the assembly of the collective society manifests, takes a form, you know. And it may be that our collective manifestation is electronic now. I don't think so. You know, it's like, I mean, it's just extremely unsatisfying, you know. It's not very sexy, you know. It's just all, it's also you know, it's a kind of a wimpy response. I mean, it's not really, you know, it doesn't really do the, it doesn't really, it doesn't really allow us to discover one another with all of the dangerous and chaotic, you know, unimaginable things that we might actually find out, you know, if we were like face to face and together, you know, all that flesh. It's just so unruly. Who knows what might happen? Look what happens when masses of people get together, you know. Chaos, you know, explode. The crowd exploded into violence, you know. This is what people, you know, imagine. This is what we're given to believe, you know. I thought Elias Canetti wrote an interesting book about crowds. Familiar with that? Beautiful. Some of it's a bit satiric, but in its own inimitable style. It's beautiful stuff describing different forms and movements and aesthetics and sensibilities, you know, of collective gathering, you know. I love that stuff. That's the real stuff of the theater, you know. And what a shame, you know, that we, you know, everybody just kind of walks in there and sits in those little velvet seats, you know. It's like, okay, yeah. I think one of the interesting things that happens with the electronic culture is that more and more, I think that we're going to coming to appreciate more and more the potential of human presence, and you know what that difference is. We never gave it much thought before. We just took it for granted. You know, I mean, virtual reality is just not all it's cracked up to be. Let's face it. Did you ever put one of those things on? It's like, it's, you know, it's like the difference between digital and analog. You know, as a musician, I'm aware of that too. You know, it's like digitizing experience. You know, it's like you can tell. You know, we are smarter than the technology. You know, but not in technology's terms. You know, our perception is unique. We are not just sophisticated machines, you know. There's some other sublime and transcendent enigma that we embody. And in the theater, it's possible to give that its full reign, to let it hang out, to take off the girdle that's been keeping us from breathing, you know, and just, you know, swing the body and feel the weight turn with it, you know, and, you know, the audience will look to the stage, you know, and wonder at the audacity of the actor, you know. And it's a fragile bridge to build between the audience and the actor now. This is the task I think that we have ahead of us. I think I think that it has to come more from examining the public assembly and what the audience is telling us. I think that we really have to go there. We have to look at that. We have to experience. This is why I want a laboratory. This is why I want to. I want experimentation again. You know. I don't know the answer to it. I know the direction and the sensibility, and I know some forms that I've worked with and have been in. You know, in the living theater especially. Wow, God, did they open the door? You know. I mean, beyond the environmental theater and all that kind of stuff, you know, from the 60s and 70s and happenings and all of that. The living theater plowed right through all of that to much more, in my opinion, a much more not only transcending, but useful, you know. You know, and not only is the art of it more sublime, but it's more sublime because I'm referring to the Living Theatre's experiments with public assembly. Not only is the art of it more sublime than the contrived thing of a happening, and you know, and sort of like that gallery thing that happened in the '60s, you know, or environmental theater, which is just, you know, not just, but so often was just extending the concept of constructivism to the audience, you know, the audience being unprepared, you know, still stuck in that quicksand of Stanislavski's, you know, the actor prepares. Yeah, the actor's prepared, but what about the audience? What are they prepared to do? The theater should be a place where they can do their rehearsals for, you know, and that's what I mean by experimentation, you know. And the Living Theatre had the audacity to create, to open the space out to the, I really give it to them. We really gave it to them. I mean, they started in the late '60s in Paradise Now, and there's you know, Judith and other people. You know, I wasn't with them in Paradise Now, but in the piece Paradise Now, you know, you know, people say, oh, the Living Theatre screamed. They were addressing 5,000 people in a big sports hall. You know, free theater. The theater is free. Do whatever you want. Become whoever you want to be. The free theater. This is the moment. We give it to you. You know what I mean? It was like, I mean, that was a scene. The whole thing wasn't that, but that was a scene where they said that, and people got up and did you know, they did things. They played music. They gave orations. They whatever they did. You know, it was chaos. Absolute, divine, beautiful Dionysian chaos. It wasn't an environmental theater piece in which they made the sign of Dionysian chaos. It was dangerous Dionysian chaos, you know, with the windows and the doors open and the police outside, trying to, you know, that's what confined it. It wasn't the structure of the piece that confined Paradise Now. Paradise Now, time and time again in its performances, the doors opened and the cops were there with paddy wagons, just in case. That's what happened in that space. Wow. You know, so it's like, so when I say that the Living Theatre, you know, really opened the door to all of that stuff, they did the dangerous leap. They opened the door to all of that stuff. And it's not that I feel that now that, you know, the work is to make a more refined version of it or something like that. We still need that dangerous ground. But I think that gratefully, the Living Theatre also went much further with it. They investigated what that collective space could be. Like they started leaning more, like by the time I joined them, they started leaning more towards this other tendency that they have. It was always an alchemical mix in the Living Theatre, that Dionysian, Artodian, you know, leap into the unknown, and that Apollonian, Brechtian, rational, you know, beauty and symmetry, you know, that whole thing, and the dialogue between those things. That's where I, so you know, the Living Theatre certainly turned me on to that. You know, it's Greek, you know, the idea of Dionysus and Apollo as the sun and the moon, and you know, the whole, and that cued me into this whole thing about alchemy. But sure, they went much further than Paradise Now in the time that I was with them. You know, we really were experimenting without relinquishing the field being free. You know, it was more encouragement. It was, you know, we gave different cues and people picked up on it. And it was all very encouraging to us too. But anyway, I mean to pick up that experiment again, because I think that it's one of the most worthwhile grounds in the theater. I don't see any reason to create a great work on the stage if it doesn't also include that experiment of the great public assembly. I'm not sure where we had started.
You were talking about the Living Theatre as being some sort of an index of society at large and a reflection of social control.
Oh yeah. Right, yeah. Well, we started in that period with an examination of domination and submission and the social contract, or human relationship, human recognition being dominated by the social contract, and the nature of the social contract in our times being one of domination and submission at every turn of the screw. And it was a tough position to take, you know. What was tough about it wasn't justifying it, and so that it could continue to stand. It was the alarming truth of it that kept unfolding to us as we worked with it. And it handed, doing that work handed us the very difficult task of leaping through that into an affirmation of what, and I think the vision piece. Well, it's all about this, it's about that, it's about that. Oy, what a headache, it's so bad. It's so bad, it's so bad, it's so bad, it's so bad, it's so repressive, it's so repressive, it's so bad, And we were always struggling to make the vision piece, it's like 7 meditations, it's like the 7th meditation, And we never shrank from, the need to articulate and express all of this negativity, so to speak, to use a West Coast perspective on it. But I believe that the affirmation came and could only come in that other aspect of the theater. We could use our art to articulate, to represent, and to explain, to digress, to reflect, to do so many things in terms of our agenda of showing that vision. But the resolution, the breaking through it into the resolution, both in terms of its analysis and in terms of the aesthetics of the piece itself, had to come in a more direct experience. It basically had to break through the edifice of the art of the semiotics of the form and all of that. Yes, it had to be the Artodian. It had to be the Artodian bridge. That the double in the space all along is that question. Okay. The audience often said it to us. We know this. But what can we do? And basically, our response was, "That's it. You can ask, what can we do? Now, what can we do? You're exactly right. What can we do about this? Or what do you think? Do you think that this is true?" And we would get people talking, and without. It was as if the play was over, but the play wasn't over. It was that extraordinary opportunity of creative public assembly, bringing it further, or developing, articulating the for that collective group to become as articulate as actors who are prepared and analyze and prepare the action for performance. Well, that's not required of them, necessarily. However, I think that the theater can reassert itself as a ground in which that also can be investigated. I think that, as I said, for me the bottom line is that the audience needs a lot of rehearsal. And I think that it's the role of the artist in the theater to create that space for that rehearsal to happen, to guide them a little bit, to give them some suggestions. It's like directing a play without a hierarchical agenda. It's collective creation. And I think that we felt that kind of confidence in approaching the audience because that's how we were with one another. That was also the other aspect of the internal politics of the living theater, was that we knew that we couldn't create a meaningful political theater if we weren't ourselves dangerously experimenting with collective creation, with collaboration that was open to discovery, as though it were new territory in human relationship. And it wasn't always easy, and it wasn't always successful from one moment to another. But I don't think we ever lost the, you know, as much as it was a rough voyage, you know, it was a real rough voyage. But I don't think that we ever lost the integrity of the unity of that vision and that experiment in all the years I was with them. And I think that that made it possible to approach, in the first place, this whole idea of creative public assembly. If anybody could do it, the Living Theatre could do it. They earned it by their self-imposed, you know, it's classical, man. You know, blew my mind when I first met them. You know, it was classical. They were like, it was like a heroic voyage, you know, without any of the. Yeah, without any of the hierarchical implications of that, you know, without the better one being there. There was no better one, you know. So, yeah.
Was the direct action workshop a further movement towards engaging the audience?
Yes, I think it is. I think it's one. It's one path to take. I think that it takes again, as I said, creative public assembly follows from that experiment of collective creation and collaboration, and that's what direct action workshop is. But it's doing it with a group of strangers. It's like walking into the audience and saying, "Who wants to make a play?" And then you make a circle, and all you do is guide. All you do, I mean, like you. Basically, my function as a facilitator in the direct action workshop is to do the best I can to keep it from kind of like degenerating into you know, some hierarchical process, keeping the whole thing as collective as possible. Sometimes, in order to do it, depends. From one group to another, it's different. You know, sometimes you have to break into smaller groups and then come back together. You create kinds of dynamics. You create different kind of dynamics that are agreed upon with everyone. You know, you make suggestions. But after the first, well, again, it's like this astonishing thing. You know, you find out that people are prepared. You know, much more than one might expect. You know, I've done 40 and more direct action workshops. I only missed one performance. One time we didn't get the play done. Each time, 1 week. Most of the time, people who never met each other before. Create and perform a play in public on the street. Wow. I mean, if I told you I was going to do that, you know, I mean, what would you think? You know, never worry, you can't do that. How are you going to do that? In a week? It's not enough time. Oh yeah, right, it's not enough time. Yeah. But it is enough time. It was enough time. The time pressure was part of, you know, what, you know, people rose to the occasion. Amazing. And it's there for everybody to see what their motivation is, why they do it. You know what I mean? It's just extraordinary. You know, it reminds me sort of, it brings to mind this idea about civilization and you know, this fear of chaos and barbarism and all of that. If, you know, we must have a repressive society so that we can control, you know, it's not only the crazy elements, they're just sort of like the people who escape into that craziness. It's all of us. We're all dangerous, you know what I mean? We need to impose this, you know, nonsense. You know, it's insanity. It's like, not only that, but it's no fun. And that's the kind of thing you find out in doing things like direct action workshop or creative public assembly. You find out that, all right, that's what I was going to say, is that you know, like you look at statistics, you know, and like, you know, about murder, and you know, people read the stuff in the paper and they say, oh God, you know, crime, you know, they want stricter laws to crack down on crime and all this stuff, you know. The astonishing, you know, statistics are how in the moment of the you know, the intensity of passion that people get into, and especially under the pressure cooker of this repressive society, you know, the anger and the crazy shit that comes down between people emotionally, it's a wonder that, you know, we're not all fucking killing each other, you know? Like, wow, what a triumph of the human soul to live through this fascist, repressive environment, you know? I mean, that says something about us, you know? That's positive, that's real affirming, you know? And you start to see it a little more that way when you get to see what people are made of in public assembly, you know? Public assembly is very revealing. Very affirming area of investigation and experience. You know, mutual anarchist concepts like mutual aid, or you know, pacifist concepts. You know, like the tendency to, you know, to not give in at that moment, to being drawn into the conflict. You know, that happens every day. It happens all the time. It happens in everybody's life, you know, at one moment or another, at least once a day. I mean, like, let's just pull that out of the air. At least once a day, you say to yourself, okay. Or you say to yourself, oh, well, let me hold the door for this person. I mean, it sounds like a silly little thing, you know, but we're given to believe, you know, we're driven by the society of, like, you know, to justify every action and every thought that we have in terms of personal gain, or the logistics of positioning, you know, emotionally with each other and all of that. You know, it's like, you know, we can throw that off. You know, we have that potential. We enact that potential all the time. It's here. You know, it's not that we live in a total, you know, it's not bleak. I don't feel that it is. You know? And I think that the theater is such a place to celebrate that, you know, and to give it a more to give that generality its true diversity in terms of its form and its worth and its, you know, and that gives it energy, you know. One starts to create a technology around it to facilitate it, and that's revolutionary technology. To facilitate our best ability collectively, and what that's all about. And I think the theater is the place to investigate that. I think that that's a laboratory for it.